You mentioned that one of the key points of your practice at Just Therapy was obviously being able to speak freely. And I talk to people and nowadays, and it just these people have forgotten so much about the importance of free speech. Just being able to, in order to be able to think freely, you have to be able to speak freely. How important, just as in general, obviously, and then to your practice in particular for dealing with these things, how important is free speech?
I think it's one of the most important things that we have. It's one of the most important rights and protections that we should have, because you can't. I don't think you can exist and thrive as a society without that. And the sad fact is that many people only appreciate the importance of free speech when it's too late and when they've had their own free speech curtailed. And even just having open debate about things, because a lot of people say, use the phrase "no debate," and that's kind of how it's been for the last number of years. But I've seen it in the gender space as well. I've often put out invitations to those on the other side of the argument to come and debate with me, in a public forum on these issues, and always, turned down. But the thing is, we can't actually get ahead and advance as a species unless we're able to discuss and debate in a respectful way all of these ideas, no matter how controversial. And so I've always been of the view that no topic should ever be off the table whatsoever. But I learned this, sadly, way back in university, because I was running the debating union at my university, and I was trying to put on public debates on controversial topics with some controversial speakers, but having balanced sides and allowing students to make up their own minds. And on a number of occasions, the university, even back then, this is now 2011, 2012, back then, the universities were already blocking speakers from being allowed to attend campus and debate these ideas. And I thought, particularly in a university, which should be a hotbed of debate and dialogue, it's just really quite concerning. And you've got this kind of guilt by association now. Forget about what your own views are, but if you do so much as associate yourself with anyone who has unpalatable views, you're open for cancellation as well and condemnation. And I think that's really dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And when you were running that back at the university, did you notice a lot of the speakers, either they say, we see it out in America a lot, for example, speakers being cancelled, and even things like Antifa and other organizations, threatening and outright in many instances causing terrorism and stuff like that. But when you were trying to get speakers together to debate controversial topics and stuff like that, you noticed that the university were rejecting people with common threads of ideas, like people who were more conservative or people who had certain viewpoints on certain things. Did you notice there was any commonalities on people who were allowed to speak and who weren't?
Well, I think it definitely. Well, let me put it like this: it wasn't kind of liberal left-wing voices that were being banned. And the thing is, it didn't even matter if the debate itself wasn't on the kind of forbidden topic. So to give you an example, I was running a debate on the death penalty, which is quite a common debate for student unions and debating clubs to have. And I was trying to find speakers, particularly like political speakers. I was reaching out to different politicians. I wanted to obviously have a decent lineup. I wanted to have a decent debate on this, and I was reaching out to anyone noteworthy who had a strong position one way or the other on it. And I recall I had an MP against it. I reached out to Nick Griffin from the BNP. Now, before I get cancelled all over again, I should say I am not a supporter of Nick Griffin nor the BNP, right? I invited him because he, at that point, was the leader of a political party, and he and the political party that he ran in a manifesto commitment was to restore the death penalty. So I thought, well, this makes sense because at least he can forward a decent argument on why he wants the death penalty back.
Mm-hmm.
But I was told that simply wasn't allowed. And ironically, the other person I eventually got to sign up to speak in favour of the death penalty was Peter Hitchens. And when Peter Hitchens discovered that I had invited Nick Griffin to speak on the same side of the motion, he sent me an email, a very aggressive email, pulling out and essentially threatening to ruin me bear in mind, I was like a first or second year student at the time. Peter Hitchens said he was essentially going to ruin me and make sure that I never got anywhere in life. And how dare I even suggest that he might want to debate alongside Griffin on this topic? And
Wow.
as I said, I'm I am not a fan of Nick Griffin. I think the stuff that the BNP were pushing was abhorrent. But surely we can have people, even if they wildly disagree on certain topics, can still share a platform on an issue in which they have a commonality. I mean, so anyway, as I said, I'm sure I'll get cancelled for having revealed this all over again. But it was just it taught me a valuable lesson around this guilt by association piece. And so since that time, I always swore to myself that I would share a platform with anyone if in pursuit of a particular principle that because I'm an issues person. I'm not going to be shamed out of sharing platforms with people. Even if I disagree with them vehemently on everything else they stand for, if we're aligned, let's say on the trans issue, I'll share a platform with you. Because we have to. We have to collaborate with people, even people we don't like very much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And exactly. Again, well, it sounds like you basically went through a box ticking exercise and found politician supports the restoration of the death penalty. Big voice at the time, leading. I believe he was leading the party at the time. You said Nick Griffin was leading the party at the time. Um, and again, it's going to generate more conversation about it. Because if you have like a more high profile person, there's going to be more conversation around it, which in theory is what you want. And I often see that in America as well. But you went through this box ticking exercise of like, don't support anything else that he does, but he's for this issue. Let's just have him on to talk about this issue in particular. And then just people wanted to ruin your life over that for trying to facilitate open conversation. And you mentioned as well that I believe it was your master's program that you were removed from. Am I right to say that was your master's program?
Yes, yeah.
And that was for, again, basically not going along with the political orthodoxy, pretty much not going along with this radical left wing ideology that you objected to. Is that right?
I mean, to be honest, it was even more narrow than that. As I said, I was concerned about the trans stuff, particularly in the field of mental health care. I had set up an account on Twitter, as it then was. I started a government petition, actually, because there was talk of banning conversion therapy way back then. And I set up a government petition asking for the government to protect ethical explorative therapy. I mean, which I didn't think was particularly controversial at the time. Anyway, I put that out online. I engaged in some media, I did a bit of writing, and then I believe that a number of ideologues and activists kind of contacted my place of study and essentially, complained about me. And rather than taking a nuanced position, rather than inviting me in for a discussion about what my views were and my concerns were, I was just excommunicated over email one day out of nowhere. Um, and again, things like duty of care that these educational providers have towards students, that seemed to go under the bus as well. So um, people are more than willing to kind of kowtow to the baying mob these days.
Is very much mob rule. I remember I think it was Cardiff University. There was a clip that came out. I think it was about a year or so ago now. Might have been a little bit longer. And it was Jacob Rees-Mogg that was giving a speech. You might have seen the clip. It went viral for a little while around the time it came out. But he was giving a talk, and there was a bunch of pro-Palestine Gaza activists that were basically chasing him out and nigh on threatening to do harm to him. They got all the flags. They were crowding around the car. And it is, and that's the thing that happens with a lot of these instances where if you say things that is deemed unacceptable, again, people use the term blasphemy laws. I think it's quite often, very suited to what's going on. You say the wrong thing and, all of a sudden the people who might object to the death penalty become very pro it when they get to throw the stones metaphorically and stuff like that. What was that experience like of being removed from the course, obviously, and then how obviously did you come back from that?
It was really awful. I mean, I try and kind of put it leave it as a distant memory. But it was, I'd never encountered anything like this, and I never saw it coming either. I do maybe sometimes too much. I do, and maybe this is a tendency of being a combination of a lawyer and a therapist, but I do tend to overthink and overanalyze things, as many of us do. So I usually can see ahead at what the pitfalls are of what I'm planning on doing, but here I never in a million years imagined that would happen. So it really shook me, and my future plans went up in smoke. And you know, at the very beginning, in the aftermath of that, I couldn't really see a future, to be honest, because it wasn't just that my vocational plans had been kind of snatched away from me, but I felt that my reputation had been kind of irreparably damaged. Um, but I had support around me. I very quickly went into legal mode, which is a good thing to be able to do, I think. And because I felt the injustice of this, and pretty quickly I had hooked up with what then became my solicitor, and he said, "You've got a strong case," and I said, "Okay, let's do it." And we had to crowdfund the money because it's expensive to bring litigation in the UK, unfortunately. But we raised it, raised well over £100,000, for which I'll always be grateful to the thousands of people who generously donated to the cause. And I fought it. Do you know what I mean? Because you've got to fight back. And when I have conversations with people who have been put in a similar position or are fearful they're going to get cancelled, I try and offer support and reassurance and I guess motivation to fight back against these things, because it's the only way we're actually going to defeat it. But the litigation, I mean, they were banged to rights, and in the end, they were clearly desperate to want to settle out of court. So, I agreed settlements with them, and you know, there's a bit of me that would have liked to have taken it all the way. Uh,
Mm.
you know, I would have liked to have seen some of them squirm under the cross-examination of my barrister. I'll never get that pleasure, unfortunately. But, it felt like the right decision at the time. I also just wanted to put it behind me. I mean, it had taken up 3 years of my life, essentially. And once that concluded, kind of middle of last year, I thought, right, well, let's crack on now. Let's continue down the path that I was always intending to go down. And that's what led me to setting up my private practice and Just Therapy as an organization. So I'm really very pleased that I'm able to practice and do what I wanted to do all along, and that they didn't completely rob me of this. But it's not without its issues. I mean, I have activists online threatening to report me to the police and claiming that I'm a conversion therapist. I get a lot of hoax calls and contacts reaching out to me. I'm also not able to advertise on a lot of kind of the mainstream therapy platforms, etc. So it's not without its challenges, but I'm just grateful I can do it at all, to be honest.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I get what you mean. And they're all too keen. They're all too keen, these people. But you got to think, maybe, oftentimes it seems that they don't have anything better to do than to just, harass and get down somebody that's actually, been very successful despite a lot of adversity, which is obviously in your case, for example, going from obviously being unfairly removed from your master's course to now setting up your own organization, and obviously in your own private practice as well. So I always like that, including that. It's almost, I don't want to say redemption story, but it's like, no matter how bad things get, people always got to remember that if you keep fighting, it'll turn good again. I think that's what people got to try and keep in their mind, especially because see a lot of people like myself at the moment, we can feel very hopeless with the way that we see things going on, whether it's legislation that's been passed through government that we don't agree with, that we really have no say in, it seems, and what our government is getting us into and all stuff like that. Well, you just gotta, I think it was Winston Churchill that said, if you're going through hell, keep going.
Mm.
If you're going through hell, keep going at the end of the day. You
I agree.
mentioned, oh, go on.
I was just going to say I completely agree with you, and it, particularly in this day and age and with how fast information travels, like people can actually make a difference. This isn't some kind of cringeworthy cliche. Like, I mean, I was about to say I was a nobody. I'm still a nobody in the grand scheme of things, but I was definitely a nobody back then. I thought no one's going to give a damn if I've been kicked off my course, etc. But I had a lot of support, and as I said, it gave me some sort of platform, and I thought, can I create something positive out of what's happened to me here? And in certain ways, I feel that I've helped to shift the debate a little bit, at least within the mental health professions. And so you can turn something very bad into something very good, and even the worst outcome can present new opportunities. So I always recommend fighting. Of course, you do have to have some sort of foundation to fight. And some people reach out to me and they're too afraid to speak out because if they do, and if they were to lose their jobs, they literally couldn't keep a roof over their head for themselves and their kids. But perhaps at that moment in time, they're not in the right position to fight.
Mm.
Um, so people do have to put their families first, but what we need to demonstrate is that if something bad happens to you because you've spoken out and you're fighting for justice, you're speaking out in favor of principles and ethics, that you're going to have people rallying around you to support you, because it can feel very lonely, very isolated. But people are continuing to crowdfund litigation for people who have lost their jobs or been kicked off their courses, and so it's quite incredible, actually. I think when something like this happens to a person, they see both the worst and the best of the way that humanity can be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I mentioned this again. A lot of times people's outlook can be what turns a positive, a negative from a positive from a negative, is what I was looking for there. Positive from a negative. Because you often find yourself when you're in those situations, you have two choices, right? You either continue to wallow in like the negative emotion and whatever term you want to give to it, self-pity or all of these things, or you say, right, this thing has happened. It's not what I wanted to happen. It's not a good thing that's happened. It's not just, it's not fair, but here's what we're going to do about it. And you refocus it and go in it in that way.